G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with part 2 of The Outsiders and First Dog on the Moon. You're looking at a Capuchin sundial.
How little control Abbott has over his backbench, certain elements of his backbench. So you've got Corey Bernardi and George Christensen sort of going off script here, but I don't see any evidence that Abbott's been doing the hard yards with people in the Senate and with people like Christensen to actually to work with them and be alive to their concerns and sort of stop them, as it were, from distracting from the government's message. So the ability of Abbott to manage his backbench and to manage the Senate, I think, is absolutely critical, and to his continued success as Prime Minister. And I'm not seeing any evidence of that being the case.
Beyond that, Anthony Lowenstein, we had comments from the Prime Minister. Yes, he finds it confronting, the burqa, if he's ever seen one, or the niqab. His chief of staff reported in the papers of having told the people pushing for the ban that if they were going to do that, they needed to couch it in terms of a security issue. Is there a subtext in all this, Anthony? I mean, is there a sense from the government that there is some sort of political advantage in attaching itself to this as a campaign?
I think there's a perceived advantage. Whether there is, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I think it's very clear that I think Sabine's point on the one hand is possibly correct, that there is an idea somehow that there are elements of the Liberal backbench who are rather unruly. But another way to look at it, in fact, is that Abbott's rather happy with that kind of messaging. He can come in then as the mature uncle at the end of the week and sort of put down his unruly backbench and say, listen, I'm going to speak sense about this issue. But ultimately, the subtext is very clear to say to the wider community that, yes, we want to include Muslims in our Team Australia, so to speak, but ultimately there is a sense that a lot of people in the Liberal Party feel profoundly uncomfortable with the Muslim community. The engagement with the Muslim community is so minimal. And anyone who you speak to in the Muslim community, and of course there are some who are close to the Labor and Liberal Party, and the Greens for that matter, but the vast majority of the Muslim community, and indeed the wider community, is so disconnected. And also, let's face it, the majority of politicians, in fact virtually every politician and virtually the majority of the press, have no engagement with Islam, and in fact they're not Muslim themselves. So the understanding our incredibly white Australia, I use that term in the modern sense rather than in the bad old days, in some ways rings true, because the engagement of this sort of debate brings up the fear of the other. And it's sort of obvious that a lot of Australians look at a niqab or look at a burqa and feel uncomfortable about that.
There's an unresolved issue in this too, of course, as to whether the PM can in fact overwhelm the will of the presiding officers. We will see that play out in time.
If he wants to.
Well, we shall see. Thanks to our outsiders this morning. Tim Colbatch, his new book, Dick Hamer, The Liberal, is out now. Anthony Lowenstein from The Guardian and other places, and Sabine Wolf from JWS Research, 6.5 minutes away from 10. Patriots, welcome to First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living. I'm Walkley Award-winning cartoonist for The Guardian, First Dog on the Moon. This week has seen the campaign to ban the burqa reach levels we haven't encountered since the Crusades. The Speaker of the House, apparently acting on the orders of decreed that anyone who wanted to visit Parliament during question time while wearing a burqa or a niqab or any other kind of face covering, which is code for a burqa or a niqab, had to sit in the way upstairs behind the glass section with the kiddies. Sounds perfectly safe for everyone concerned. However, some people have suggested that this was the worst kind of dog whistling. Firstly, because everyone was able to hear it, and a proper dog whistling should have been only audible to racists or potential racists. And secondly, the Prime Minister, who apparently had not been consulted on this, what should we call it, religious apartheid, decided to reverse the decision after about 2 hours. This was seen as either A, bold leadership, thank you News Corp, or B, a government in chaos who has absolutely no idea what it's doing, and that's pretty much everyone else. Interestingly, someone else who's had problems with full face coverings in the past is Channel 9's senior political correspondent, Mr. B. Bear, or Humphrey, as some of you might know him. Previously known for his work on the award-winning children's show Here's Humphrey, which unfortunately came to an abrupt and awkward end when management realised that he hadn't worn pants for the entire 25 years of the show. Since then, Humphrey B. Bear has been working out of Channel 9's Parliamentary Press Gallery office, and we have him on the line right now. Humphrey B. Bear, thanks for talking to us here at The Guide. How is your move to the Press Gallery going? Oh, well, that's great to hear. I understand you ran into Jackie Lambie in the Parliament House car park the other day. Did she have any comment on the burqa niqab situation? I see. And was the wallaby injured at all? Oh, well, look, that is good to know. Was it a whole falafel roll with hummus, or more of a lone kebab with a bit of baba ganoush? Right. Well, look, the main thing is that no one was hurt. Now, Humphrey, obviously you have a history of getting your gear out. Do you wear pants when you're sitting in the press gallery observing Parliament? I mean, we all know the gallery has moments of, shall we say, indiscretion. Apparently Dennis Shanahan goes commando at every opportunity, but even he's not known to regularly drop his dacks. What about you? Well, yes, I know you sit down behind a desk, but you do have to stand up and walk about at some point, surely. I see. Now, I understand there's been some discussion around whether you are an actual bear or just a bloke in a suit. Is that right? So, then am I correct in suggesting that this burqa niqab ban was in fact not about burqas at all, but was because you gave Cory Bernardi a hell of a fright that one time in the queue at Aussie's Cafe and were briefly required to sit in the glassed area of the gallery? I thought so. And am I also correct in suggesting that as soon as the Prime Minister realised that Bronwyn Bishop had instructed a large, trouserless bear to sit in a glass box in Parliament House with an unknown number of school children, that he then reversed the decision? I thought as much. Well, thanks for your time, Humphrey. We'll leave it to the listeners to decide. Is this government terrible and racist on purpose or accidentally? Or perhaps both? Because, under this government, you can have your truth and eat it too. Till next time, and thanks for listening, Patriots. This has been First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living, proudly brought to you by the First Dog on the Moon Institute.
Yeah, well, my own personal theory on why Tony Abbott is so terribly frightened by burqas is because they resemble the head covering of Catholic nuns back in the 1950s when Abbott was a boy, or where his ideological worldview was firmly rooted. So maybe Tony Abbott was rooted by a nun back in the day and he's still scared of women with their head covered. But it strikes me as extremely interesting that Australian politicians have joined with French and English and American politicians to condemn burqas, niqabs, hijabs, any form of a head covering worn by a Muslim woman as being confronting and frightening, apparently on the basis that in Chechnya, or maybe it was in Moscow, some Chechnyan women widows were wearing full top-to-toe burqas, and they pulled out a hand grenade and a machine gun and they attacked some Russian-speaking Russian army loyalists. So therefore, by extrapolation, any woman in a burqa must be carrying a machine gun and a hand grenade because that's how paranoid people think. Surely that's the way of it, isn't it? Once upon a time, an aeroplane crashed, therefore every aeroplane is about to crash. Once upon a time, a person whose skin was darker than the average Eskimo committed a crime, therefore all blackfellas are obviously criminals. But it's interesting too that rich Jewish women in New York are not permitted outside unless their hair is completely covered up. And therefore either they think their God theory is really stupid, or they think they're really cunning because rich Jewish women in New York wear a wig when they go outside so that their own personal hair is covered up so nobody can see their hair, but they blend in with the average New Yorkers by wearing wigs. Generally, a wig of a different hair colour to that of their own. Now, this indicates to me that it's not a Muslim tradition, it's not a Christian tradition, it's not a Jewish tradition. It's a tradition that predates Judaism, the idea of covering women's hair up apart from in the sight of men of that family. I'm going to show you something. Here we see a map of the world. And if we zoom in on the Mediterranean, and we think of all of the places that were conquered by Alexander the Great, he got up here, he got out over here, he got across here, he got over there, he got over here to India, right? These are the countries where the populations still are living in reaction to having been occupied by a major military empire. And what happens when you're occupied by a major military empire is if you've got a daughter or a sister or a wife or a mother who looks remotely sexually attractive to a soldier who hasn't been home for years, who sees a lot of death and there's not much in the way of medical care and there's a lot of illness, that woman is likely to be picked up and raped. Maybe killed afterwards, maybe taken along for further use as a comfort woman like the Japanese were doing in the Second World War with Koreans. But my point is, the idea of wrapping your women up so nobody can see them is common to every place where Alexander the Great conquered, and it's also common to the places where those cultures later on colonized. So yes, you get Muslims in Indonesia with women wearing shawls, but it's got nothing to do with Islam. It's got nothing to do with Muhammad because it goes back earlier than that. In the same way that Muhammad said that he was a prophet and he came in a long line of prophets, and in order to follow his teachings, everybody had to also follow the teachings of Jesus and Moses and John the Baptist. So the Islamics, the Jews and the Christians are all bound by the commandment, thou shalt not kill. And claiming that it's okay to kill because God kills with droughts and fires and floods and volcanoes and earthquakes is utter bullshit. Because humans are not gods. Humans are humans. And life works better if we all obey the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. As you would have them do unto you. Not as you fear they might do unto you and therefore you want to get the kick in first. Preemptive violence is never the answer. And history demonstrates clearly that unless you use an atom bomb on a nation that is already on the point of surrender, because it's lost its interior lines of communication and it's lost its food and resources, then bombing raids only strengthen the bombed population's will and resolve to continue fighting. And here I cite Winston Churchill, bombing of London, the Russians in Stalingrad, the Vietnamese in Hanoi. There's no possible way that you can bomb an insurgency out of existence. You can blockade it, you can starve it of resources, you can refuse to trade with it, you can stop buying their goods or their oil or whatever it is that's keeping their economy alive, and you can leave them to live an insular life riding donkeys up the main street, waving cutlasses as they try and enforce their tax regime. But violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. And Tony Abbott's fear of the burqa probably dates back to the days when he was molested by a nun. At least that's my story and I'm sticking to it. What do you think, Charlie? Yes, I know, you want a biscuit. Good boy. But I would have thought that at a time when Ebola is out of control, trying to bomb a bunch of people in the desert because their women wear burqas is a completely bloody stupid idea. Warbles, not a lot to YouTube. Ciao.